Tucker Carlson is one of the most powerful individuals in the American mediascape today. He models himself as a voice of normal, working Americans, or as he calls it, real America, or sometimes legacy America. But really, he's from an immensely privileged and politically connected family. Carlson has won his place in the United States frontal lobe through bold opinions that he voices strongly, not least that the attack on Congress on January the 6th was a good thing, or at least not a bad one, and that Trump really won the 2020 election. Private text messages from the same time reveal that really, in his own words, Tucker Carlson hates Trump and knows the election's outcome was fair. He says these things that he knows will get attention, improve his ratings, and make him money, but he doesn't believe them. This is Tucker Carlson, Opportunist.
Liars are touchy, sometimes to the point of hysteria. They're hiding something. That's the whole point of lying. What's really happening? And what you're seeing is hysteria.
I mean, I lie. If I'm really cornered or something, I lie. I really try not to. I try never to lie on TV. I just don't, I don't like lying. I certainly do it, out of weakness or whatever.
Tucker Carlson was born on the 16th of May, 1969. He has a younger brother, Buckley Peck Carlson. His mother, Lisa McNear Lombardi, 1947 to 2011, graduated from UC Irvine with a major in architecture in the mid-1960s. Her father, Oliver Lombardi, also an Irvine graduate, was a very successful insurance broker in San Francisco. Her mother, Tucker Carlson's maternal grandmother, was a direct descendant of German immigrant Heinrich Alfred Cressier, later known as Henry Miller, not the writer, but rather the cattle king of California. In the 19th century, Miller was one of the largest individual owners of land in America, directly controlling nearly 1.5 million acres. At the time of his death in 1916, he was worth about $1 billion in today's money. Tucker is a fifth-generation descendant and heir to this, but with so many relatives, it looks very unlikely that he has ever had access to any of this fortune. Tucker Carlson's father is from far more humble beginnings. He was born into poverty as Richard Boynton and adopted at 2 years old by the Carlson family. His adoptive father was a wool broker. Richard began his career in journalism right at the bottom as a copy boy, but worked his way to becoming a writer for United Press International, a movie columnist, and a freelance TV reporter. He rose to prominence for a 1969 article he co-authored in the magazine Look, accusing then-mayor of San Francisco, Joseph Alioto, of links to organized crime, which got the magazine sued to oblivion when Carlson couldn't produce his most important sources during the following protracted libel lawsuit. This didn't damage Richard Carlson, however. He went on to work for KABC TV, where he won a Peabody Award, then at KMFB TV as a news anchor. But he grew tired of television news in its contemporary form, later describing it as insipid, sophomoric, superficial, and full of hypocrisy.
I took my 2 boys out this morning along with the camera crew to try and catch a glimpse of these remarkable animals as they make their yearly trek some 4,000 miles from the Bering Straits to the warm lagoons of Baja California.
It was around this time that Richard and Lisa separated. At first, Lisa had custody of both Tucker and Buckley, but in 1976, Richard divorced her and demanded full custody of their sons, which he eventually won. Not long after that, Lisa moved to France, where she eventually remarried, and it seems that she either never saw her sons again or had very little contact with them, even up to her death in 2011. 2 years after her death, a handwritten will was found among her property, leaving almost everything she had to her surviving husband, with a note leaving her sons $1 each. By that time, though, much of Lisa's assets had been mostly evenly distributed between Tucker and Buckley and her widower, and Tucker and Buckley fought to keep gas and oil shares of Lisa's that go right back to Henry Miller, that she did not want them to have. But anyway, back to 1977. Tucker Carlson was 8 years old. The horror of bell-bottoms was still fresh in everyone's minds, and Richard Carlson quit journalism to work full-time for San Diego Federal Savings and Loan, headed by Gordon Luce, close friend and political advisor to Ronald Reagan. Richard became Vice President of Finance within 3 years, but just before that, and far more importantly, in 1979, he married Patricia Swanson.
And that is because Mary Lou knows that she can have a swell dinner ready in just 25 minutes.
Right.
Born 1945, Swanson had been married twice previously. Her grandfather, Carl Swanson, was a Swedish immigrant who founded the Swanson Company. His sons, Patricia's father and uncles, Tucker Carlson's step-grandfather and great-uncles, pioneered frozen dinners and coined the term TV dinner. They sold Swanson to Campbell's in 1955, and their successors have dined out on that ever since. Patricia, still married to Richard to this day, is worth a figure that can only be guessed at, although I'm guessing it contains many zeros after not a zero. She's also the niece of James William Fulbright, who was the state senator of Arkansas for 30 years from 1945. Patricia adopted Tucker and Buckley not long after she married Richard, and they changed their names to reflect this. Tucker's full name is Tucker Swanson McNear Carlson. In 1984, Richard Carlson, not content on bagging his second heiress, ran for the mayorship of San Diego. He pledged not to spend his own money, of which he had amassed a considerable amount, but he did anyway, to the tune of nearly $250,000, which in today's money is about $750,000. Despite outspending his opponent by 2-1, he lost. No matter. The next year, Reagan appointed Richard as director of the United States Information Agency, and in 1986 he became the director of Voice of America, the largest state-owned news broadcaster in the United States, which mostly targets a non-American audience with a pro-American message. Richard Carlson is, so far, the longest-reigning director of the VOA, and he only gave it up because George H.W. Bush appointed him ambassador to the Seychelles, which he was for 9 months. Sounds like a nice holiday. So by the 90s, Richard Carlson wasn't just a successful and well-connected businessman, but also a significant political operator. He wasn't just rich, he was part of the political class. He became the CEO of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, not totally dissimilar to Voice of America. He was an international observer for elections in South Africa and Albania. He has sat on the board of private companies and think tanks, and is now linked to Policy Impact, a lobbying firm that has in the past represented the likes of Victor Obran. I can't confirm this for absolute certain anywhere, but trawling through their website, I found this seemingly forgotten, incomplete webpage from 2019. Of course, it was the 80s and 90s that were formative for Tucker Carlson. He lived with his father, brother, and stepmother in the wealthy beach town of La Jolla, 10 or so miles north of San Diego. There, he went to the highly regarded, private La Jolla Country Day School, whose modern fees are shown here, in case you fancy blowing $30,000 on your idiot kindergartner. When he was 14, Tucker went, or was sent, to St. George's School on Rhode Island. Today, its fees are $74,000 yearly. Some fellow classmates have since described Carlson as a committed contrarian and brave in challenging the views of others, especially when those views are perceived as status quo. At St. George's School, Carlson, in his sophomore year, met Susan Andrews, the daughter of the school's new headmaster and his future wife. After St. George's, Tucker spent 4 years at the private liberal arts college, Trinity, where he ultimately got a BA in history. Anyway, he graduated in 1991. After apparently being rejected from the CIA, Carlson embarked on a career in journalism, with his dad apparently saying, "They'll take anybody. Losers, illiterates, sons of ambassadors, literally anybody." Tuk began as a fact-checker for Policy Review, a conservative journal, then worked as an opinion writer for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, then the Washington Examiner. But his profile was raised by his 1999 interview with George W. Bush, featured in the debut edition of short-lived magazine Talk. While Carlson was, at the time at least, pretty pro-Bush, the candor of his article was perceived by the Republican political establishment not necessarily as critical, but not very helpful either. And this was really vital for his career. This, along with other examples, such as a 1997 article he wrote in the New Republic criticizing Grover Norquist's lobbying efforts in the Seychelles, made Carlson appear to not be unbiased. He clearly fell on the Republican side of things even back then, but open to nuance and willing to criticize across the political spectrum. With his ease in front of the camera and this pedigree, good enough, he started picking up panel spots on CNN, landing a regular spot on Late Edition. Then he co-hosted the short-lived The Spin Room before settling in as a rotating host of Crossfire. It wasn't unusual punditry for the time, not unusual for this time. Some discourse, mostly fluff, all done in radio voices. But then, in October of 2004, Jon Stewart came on the show and gave them a 15-minute segment that now Crossfire is probably best remembered for.
Your partisan, hacks. When you have people on for just knee-jerk, reactionary talk.
Wait, I thought you were going to be funny. Come on, be funny.
No, I'm not going to be your monkey.
I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring. Let me ask you a question on the news.
No, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
CNN did not renew Carlson's contract on January the 5th of 2005. A 2017 article in the New York Times cites Stewart's appearance as the reason for Crossfire's cancellation, which may be true, but is really just a guess. Carlson said he resigned in April of 2004, but that directly contradicts CNN. The segment was certainly not a triumph for Carlson, but it wasn't humiliating as some say. Really, it feels quaint by modern standards. Some commentators feel that this was the turning point for Carlson, where he decided to up his game, reinvent himself a bit, and show that Jon Stewart fella what for. But watching his progress with the benefit of 2023 hindsight, I'd argue a gear shift, if any, occurred after he left MSNBC. From 2005, Tucker hosted Tucker, where he interviewed guests on a wide variety of subjects and talked with guest co-hosts during segments who usually disagreed with him or at least challenged him a little bit. Here he is, chummily chatting with his doppelganger from the upside-down dimension, Rachel Maddow.
I just think It's uncanny, and I think you should reread it. It'll change your mind. Let me just get to one quick topic that we have teased. I know, maybe this will make you feel better.
The show was cancelled in 2008 for low ratings. My educated guess is that this is what pushed Tucker Carlson into the direction he now pioneers. The MSNBC show was tempered by guests, just as capable in front of the camera as Carlson, who opposed him, and so I'd argue that Carlson's stated positions were not out of the ordinary, and so not particularly exciting to audiences. His move to Fox in 2009 allowed Carlson to shake away the shackles of nuance and start saying things that, whether he believed or not, would grab attention. He was already saying some pretty out there stuff, but not yet directly to his audience.
Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys.
Culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks. Shut the fuck up and obey is my view.
I love women, but they're extremely primitive. They're basic. They're not that hard to understand.
Well, men really need to be more sensitive, and this. Actually, men don't need to be more sensitive. You just need to be quiet and kind of do what you're told. In my brief experience, what gets women going is arguing with them.
And there's quite a lot of that. He called Bubba and the Love Sponge every week for about a year, and he talked to them for about an hour each time, and it's all stuff like this. It's mental. While with Fox, which he still works for, Carlson also founded the Daily Caller with Neil Patel, who had been Dick Cheney's chief political advisor. Carlson was part of the site until 2020, when Patel bought him out. During his time there, the Daily Caller was involved in numerous controversies and criticized for poorly sourced and even fabricated stories. They sold their user email to the Trump campaign without those people's consent. Carlson was personally accused by a writer there of stamping out any criticism of his employer, Fox. And the site was revealed to be structured in a way that the bulk of the site's work is outsourced to its own charity, the Daily Caller Foundation, which in reality exists in the same building and uses the same resources as the Daily Caller, solely to reduce tax obligations. The site also pushed conspiracy theories and over the years featured numerous articles written by contributors who also contributed to overtly white supremacist sites. As this was happening, Carlson enjoyed success on Fox News, where he became less and less chained by on-screen pushback or challenges and more outspokenly extreme, until we reach the contemporary iteration of Carlson, where he makes little to no effort to appear even-handed.
Yeah, I mean, I believe, Tucker, that it's a more sinister attempt by the left to, they want this radical country. The only way that they can achieve that is through complete chaos and confusion. And what is the best way to confuse children? Confuse them about their sexuality, confuse them about their gender, expose them to things that their little brains are not ready for yet.
It's just beyond belief. You can't get kids involved in your creepy sex stuff.
The reason he has got to this place and survived is because he's very good at knowing exactly where to stop. For example, when he criticizes Buttigieg, Carlson never says he doesn't like Buttigieg because he's gay, but he sure does bring it up a lot.
Pete Buttigieg doesn't know anything about transportation. We would bet money he can't drive a stick shift. On the other hand, Pete Buttigieg is gay, he plays the piano, and he speaks Norwegian. Let's hire him.
Buttigieg is there because he is a nationally recognized politician with the backbone of a dish rag, whose political value is towing the line. You could point to thousands of Democrats and Republicans who fit that description. Honestly, most of them. But no, Carlson has to go on about him being gay. For the last few years, Carlson will take any opportunity to decry transgenderism, happily portraying it as an ideology and cult, and again, getting right up to calling them pedophiles without actually doing it.
There's a growing movement designed to confuse children about who they are on a fundamental level. The transgender movement hates above all competition, meaning traditional religions. From ancient times, Cults have practiced castration, self-mutilation, sterilization, often on children.
In his video about Chinese influence in Brazil, he calls transgenderism a micro-issue. Well, then why make a two-parter about it? I suspect because he knows it gets him ratings. Here he is annoyed by gender-neutral bathrooms featuring the three genders, pants, skirt, wheelchair. Carlson makes sweeping statements and arguments that I highly suspect he knows are logically absurd, but it doesn't matter. He's preaching to the choir. In his video about the death of manly men, he explains the very real issue of environmental catastrophe through chemical contamination and reduced fertility, and then his solution is basically to exercise, avoid plastics, and shave your chest. Also, tan your balls. Dedicating an entire episode of one of his series, he presents Blake Masters as a non-swamp candidate, a normal Joe, just like him, even though Masters was a proxy candidate of and funded by billionaire investment banker Peter Thiel. He often accuses Democrats, and sometimes Republicans that he doesn't like, of opening up America's borders, as if ICE and Border Control are spending the Biden administration playing Connect 4 as columns of brown people skip on past. More recently, Carlson has attracted widespread criticism from Republican and Democrat politicians for his editorializing of the events of January the 6th, 2021. Again, he frames this by more or less saying that the election was stolen without saying it literally.
Yet the beneficiaries of that election continue to lie about what is now obvious.
Over these segments, Carlson cherry-picks footage and makes numerous contradictory arguments. It wasn't an insurrection, and it was almost totally peaceful, although it was instigated by federal agents, whatever it was. Well, that's a flat-out lie. Sure, most people who went to Trump's rally didn't go to the Capitol, and most people who did go did not try and kick the Capitol Police to death, but many did, and there's an incredible amount of evidence of that. Carlson makes some bold claims about the death of Brian Sicknick.
Here is surveillance footage of Sicknick walking in the Capitol after he was supposedly murdered by the mob outside. By all appearances, Sicknick is healthy and vigorous. Consider the death of police officer Brian Sicknick. Now, we still don't know exactly how Officer Sicknick died. We're not certain that anyone does know.
We do know how Brian Sicknick died. He was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, and the next day he had 2 strokes and died. Just because he was walking around after being hit doesn't mean that didn't kill him. In fact, the coroner says it did. If I hit a policeman in the head and he died the next day, they'd charge me with murder, and they'd be right. His remarks about Sicknick's death are a downright lie, and his whole take on January the 6th is so detached from what really happened, I'd really struggle to even call it spin. Carlson was, and still is, a vocal supporter of the idea that the 2020 election was stolen, or at least there were relevant irregularities. Fox is currently being sued for $1.6 billion by Dominion Voting Systems, who allege that Fox News promoted claims that they knew to be false, that Dominion had interfered with the election, or that votes counted by their machines could not be trusted. As part of that defamation suit, numerous Fox executives and others have been subpoenaed, and thousands of communications were revealed as part of discovery. Recently released text messages that have emerged from that suit, sent by Carlson, show that he did in fact know the election wasn't stolen, and that even though to this day he is outwardly pro-Trump, in his own words, he hates him passionately. His attempts to minimize the damage of January the 6th aren't the actions of a conspiracy theorist or a fanatic. He doesn't believe in or even really care about what he says now any more than he did 10 years ago. He is a natural contrarian, and his contrarianism is immensely profitable, especially in situations like this, where what he says is totally unique next to other mainstream commentators. He gives his audience what they want to hear, even if it's untrue, even if he knows it, and that's his whole, very successful niche. I doubt Carlson really believes in anything. But here's the thing. Those people trying to storm the Capitol did believe the election was stolen. Carlson likes to call the killing of Ashley Babbitt, who was shot while trying to get over a barricade in the Capitol building, murder. But Ashley Babbitt was killed because she was duped by people like him. I don't think he gives a fuck about Ashley Babbitt. In 2018, on his show, Carlson accused Karen McDougal of extorting Donald Trump. She had had an affair with Trump 10 years earlier. McDougal did not attempt to extort Trump. In fact, she was approached by his lawyer, Michael Cohen, and allegedly received $150,000 for her silence. Cohen was later convicted of breaking campaign finance laws in doing this and other illegal things. McDougal sued Carlson for defamation in 2019, but in 2020 the suit was dismissed. The judge in the case, a Trump appointee, wrote that when Carlson said on his show that it sounds like a classic case of extortion, the phrase sounds like would, quote, put any reasonable viewer on notice that Carlson himself doubts the veracity of the source of these statements and that the listener should as well. The judge went on to say, Fox persuasively argues that given Mr. Carlson's reputation, any reasonable viewer would arrive with an appropriate amount of skepticism about the statements he makes. Whether the court frames Mr. Carlson's statements as exaggeration, non-literal commentary, or simply bloviating for his audience, the conclusion remains the same. The statements are not actionable. Interesting, because when Carlson knowingly lies about the election being stolen and goads his audience into insurrection against America, he sounds like a traitor. When he talks about transgender people being groomers at any opportunity with no basis at all, he sounds like he's projecting. When he presents himself as a working, middle, normal American, when he says things that he knows are provably untrue, he sounds like a duplicitous, greedy liar. And that's an indisputable fact. Often, the rise of people on American TV screens like Carlson, who present their opinion as gospel truth, even when they know what they're saying is actually false, is blamed on the end of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987. The Fairness Doctrine mandated broadcast networks devote time to contrasting views on issues of public importance. However, as Snopes correctly points out, the Fairness Doctrine applied only to licensees, so had it remained, it probably would have made little to no difference to the way Fox operates. So, what was the catalyst for Carlson's rise? Well, there is much more competition in the news and opinion space than there was 40 years ago, but also 10 years ago. And I think that fact, combined with the increasing polarization of American politics, means that if news programs want to maintain their market share, that's a lot easier to do by pushing hard into attention-grabbing partisanship. We, he says, as if he's speaking for some massive majority. We know, we're the real America. Tucker Carlson is worth $500 million. He makes $100,000 a day. How many of his audience do you think makes half of that a year? As for Tucker's future, well, I'm not sure he plans very far ahead. I think his January the 6th videos could annoy the Fox leadership enough where they boot him, and maybe he'll end up doing some Alex Jones type shit. But whatever, there'll be another piece of shit happy to jump in his seat and say anything. Tonight on George, they're known for their work ethic. They have almost no individual identity. They shun the great American ideas of freedom and liberty, instead choosing communism like North Korea or Canada. When it comes to their bizarre socialist, open borders, groomer policies, they will die fanatically for their cause. Find out tonight how your job and country could be under threat from bees. Tonight on George. That's me. Tonight!